you had experienced a panic attack on an airplane. Walk me through it. What's happening in your brain?
It was on that flight, literally on the runway, and was so close to literally just putting my hand up and saying, I got to deboard, I got to get off this flight. Palms were sweaty, heart rate was running, starting to get a little bit dizzy. And I literally just grabbed this woman's hand. And grade 7 was an okay year for me debating wise. Grade 8 made it to the national final. Grade 9 did really well to win the national final. Joined Team Canada in grade 10, 2 world competitions, grade 11 and 12. You can kind of tell that I have a little bit of a lisp. I personally don't care. What these big data companies are now taking from you is not just your data, they're taking your attention. And they're monetizing that without giving you anything back.
96% of Americans opted out of giving their data when Apple released the update.
iOS 14.5.
What does that tell you about the mass psychology?
A lot of people don't think about privacy every day, so I don't think it's as important as some people think.
You interviewed Roman Grosjean, the man who literally walked out of fire.
I did see his hand though. He showed it to us. It looked different from a normal human hand. And when I run for office, obviously the goal one day is to run for the top seat in Canada.
How to make a good speech? What would those 3 fundamentals be?
Number 1, it has to be, I think number 2, and then number 3, and this is controversial.
Swish Goswami, you're a 4-time TEDx speaker. Your company Surf raised over $10 million and you're a founder of many other companies. Author of the book, The Young Entrepreneur, founder of an angel fund which has invested in FaZe Clan, spoken at over 300 events including Harvard University, head of marketing at Parallel Studios, United Nations Youth Leadership Award, Startup Canada's youngest Young Entrepreneurs of the Year, was a UN Youth Ambassador and consulted companies like Google and American Express, chairman of the League of Innovators, LinkedIn's Top Voice, Track Limits podcast, and recently did one with Max Verstappen. You have hobbies like tennis, meetups, Formula One, writing music. What does your mom think about you?
She loves me. My mom loves me. But no, I think that's such a great background. And it was actually funny. I posted something today on Instagram because I went on DeepSeek. I think everyone's been downloading the new AI assistant, the Chinese version of ChatGPT. And I was like, I just wonder, what does DeepSeek think about me? So I said, tell me more about Swish Goswami. And it mentioned, pretty much everything that you brought up, but it also mentioned apparently that my full name is Swapur or something like that. So I'm like, maybe it doesn't really know me that well. But I was a little bit confused. I even searched that part up just to make sure there was no article or no publication that mentioned my full name was that. But no, I appreciate the intro.
Awesome. And what sticks out to me is you understand something about action that most people don't, because you are able to do things in 24 hours and you have been able to do things before the age of 30 that most people don't do in their entire life. What do you understand about action?
I think 2 things. I think 1, action for me, I've always been constantly in motion. And I think that's important to have as an attitude. If there was something that I wanted to do, I typically don't say, I'll wait till I'm 30, I'll wait till I'm 35, I'll wait till I'm 40 to do it. I just try to take small steps to get there. So I think, a great example probably would be Track Limits. Me and my best friends, we were in Montreal. We were just joking around. We were saying, what if we created a podcast in July of 2022? And ended up in December of 2022, booking flights, getting the studio that we needed, buying camera equipment, buying audio equipment in January and February. We went out to Europe. We filmed a bunch of episodes. And in March of 2023, we launched season 1 of the Track Limits podcast. So again, from July to December, that's still about 4 or 5 months of a lot of planning and research. But when you really take a look at the intense work that we did, that was really in November and December, scheduling guests, booking everything, and just committing to getting this off the ground no matter what. So I think that's number 1. And then I think number 2, candidly, when it comes to, action, I find that it's important to do it with the right people. So no matter what it's been, whether again, it's Track Limits, whether it's Parallel. In the past, I built a company called Surf with my friend Onik. No matter what I've been involved with, I think the people that you surround yourself with are incredibly important. If those are people who are, I'll do it tomorrow, that level of energy will rub off on you. Versus if you're surrounded by people who have built things before and they're addicted to building things and they're addicted to not just talking about ideas, but actually testing them and seeing how they do, you're going to catch that bug inherently just by the people around you.
Gotcha. This is something I think I recently learned. It's like is like on just a very logical level is like if for 5 years I just really execute, then I just have more inputs, and it's like at least I can still like be like, okay, I failed, but I learned 10 data points instead of if I did not execute that much, then I just have 2 data points, which is worse off. But what fascinates me is before I like even talk to you, I would have never taken you for someone who speaks on stages like regularly, like you do it on steroids. Like 300 events is not a joke. Now, you had, difficulty pronouncing your S's and R's, and now you have spoken at 4 TEDx speeches, and now these 300 events. How does one go from this to that?
It's a great question. I was the type of student, I think growing up, I've always been very confident, but I wasn't always a confident person to put my hand up in the classroom just because of that, right? Grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, I vividly remember, not again in like a very like bullying type way, but obviously people would snicker, they would laugh when I'm saying sh instead of, saying it properly. I used to not say R's properly. I used to say va instead of ra. And so I think for me, like going through speech therapy, I did it for about 5, 6 months in school with my school counselor. And then I think after I got a little bit frustrated by doing it every Tuesday, I basically just told my parents, I'm like, I don't think this is working. I think what I really need to do is just put myself in the most uncomfortable position. My brother, thankfully, was 4.5 years older. He had debated pretty much through high school, and he was a debate champion. He had won pretty much everything, including the world competition in 2010 in Qatar, representing Team Canada. So I knew that, if I was to get into debate, I would definitely get some good support from him as well. He would be able to teach me. And that's pretty much what happened. Grade 7 was a okay year for me debating wise. Grade 8 made it to the national final. Grade 9, did really well to win the provincial final and then win the national final. Joined Team Canada in grade 10, 2 world competitions, grade 11 and 12. Sadly, never won, but came 4th and then came 2nd in 2015. And I think that was all the validation I needed. That, maybe even now, like there are words maybe where I say things a little bit weird, or maybe, you can kind of tell that I have a little bit of a lisp. I personally don't care. I obviously try my best to pronounce words properly and to clear my throat and give the best possible delivery. But I think all of my public speaking experience has really taught me that what is more important than how you say something is what you say, the substance behind what you say. And I think for me, that's where I focus a lot of my time reading, a lot of my time researching topics to make sure that no one could dispute that I know this topic better than most. And if that's how I win a debate, then that's how I win a debate. If that's how I impress people on stage public speaking, then that's how I impress people on stage. And one other thing too, I think recently this came up actually from a guest of mine who was, watching me speak. She came up to me and said, Swish, you might not be the most stylish speaker, but you by far were the most authentic speaker. And I think that makes a huge difference for me because I probably wouldn't be the most, vocally, aesthetically pleasing, stylish speaker. But the fact that I'm going to come out and tell you that, and the fact that I'm going to be very honest with you about what I know and what I don't know, I get a question from the audience about something I don't know, I'm just going to say, I don't know. I think that's refreshing for a lot of people who typically see public speakers as like, they know it all. They're kind of like elevated on stage versus for me, it's been the total opposite when I approach speaking.
I have 2 questions on that. One, I would assume so when you were a kid and you had the lisps, I would assume it would make any kid feel very insecure, right? So do you think, and maybe consciously or subconsciously, it was because of that constant insecurity that we all have in some way or the other, that you were like, fuck this, and then you just went like just on overdrive, and now you're like, yeah, it's just how it is. And now there you are at this confidence level, which is like, even if, there are some flaws, it's just fuck the world, like this is me.
Yeah, this is me. What am I going to do about it, right? And I agree with you, man. I think for sure early on I had a chip on my shoulder. Keep in mind as well, the chip on my shoulder wasn't just the fact that I had a lisp. It was also when I joined debate in grade 7, the fact that I had an older brother who was a world champion. I love my older brother to death. I'm super competitive with him, but maybe not in the way most people think. Like I would never be like, how did he become world champion? I want to as well. It was more of like my brother's a world champion. I gotta get there. I gotta get as close to that. And by the way, he was my coach. So when I was in my 2015 world champion, run, I was coached by him. So like, if that goes to show the type of relationship me and my brother has, I don't know what example would. But for me, I think the chip on my shoulder was more people looking at me saying, oh, he's in debate because of his brother. Oh, like he's never going to be as good as his brother. And that was a bit of a chip on my shoulder because my brother, by the way, never cared. I never cared. But I think it was always in the back of my head, like people might never look at my accomplishments in debate and they might think that, oh, he only got all of that because of his brother. So I think those were two chips on my shoulder. But again, over time, they went away. And, candidly, it also comes with a little bit of maturity, right? As you get older, you start to like view things like this and you're like, what a waste of time. Why was I even thinking about this? Why was I letting it consume my mindset? And that's really how I've even operated across the board now. Like there's so many opportunities. There's so many people, wealth is a good example, like making their wealth in so many different ways. I think there are a lot of people spend time criticizing people on how they made their money, and they forget that like they just need to lock in and focus on themselves and stay a little bit in their lane. And that's what I do, right? I don't try to like, wish anybody badly, but I also know that I have unique strengths that if I just focus on those, things will work out for me.
Gotcha. Interesting. The second thing I was actually curious about is you said, and I watched one of your speeches as well, and you really are like, hey, if I don't know this, I don't know that. Now, what is interesting to me is most people do not say that. And especially in like the personal growth world or even like the entrepreneurship world, everyone likes to say that, hey, I have the answers, come to me, and then maybe there's an ask after that.
Right.
So the question is, do you think it's because of confidence or is it because you're just logical? It's like, I don't know. So I cannot make up an answer.
Both. I think it's both. I think I was brought up from my mom especially telling me that the smartest people in the room are the most self-aware. And I think that is incredibly important. Like to know what you're good at, to know what you're not good at, to know what you know, to know what you don't know. The people I gravitate towards typically are people who are incredibly smart, but they know what they don't know and they're willing to learn and they're open-minded to learn that. So for me, I consider myself decently well-read. I know a lot about a lot of things, but I also know that it's impossible for me to know everything. So when I go up on stage, I want to come off personable. I want to come off as someone who, like the audience can relate to, because I don't want to be seen as like this, demigod because I'm elevated on a stage that's higher than everyone. I'm better or whatever it is, because that's sometimes the perception that, people have about speakers. And then B, I want to make sure that the audience can trust me. And the only way for them to trust me, again, is for them to know that this is a human being. He's going to know many things, but he also might not know some. And it's great when he's honest with us about that. By the way, even when I tell people that I don't know the answer, it's not like I don't try to answer the question. I do my best. I tell people like, take it with a grain of salt. I don't know much about this topic, but here's what I think, just so I can still provide some insight. But again, I want people to know that this is somebody I can actually go and, I can chat with them off stage and have a really good, honest one-on-one conversation with them.
Yeah. That is something I think like I have really learned, because I have noticed that like it's very hard for people to say I don't know, and I think it's just like social conditioning, school upbringing.
Yes.
And now it's like it's very hard for me to trust someone else. I'm like, oh, no matter what I ask you, you will make up an answer.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it's not thinking through it. So I'm like, I cannot trust your answers. But you mentioned about the fact that you want to be personable. What just made me question is like, do you think it is something that you consciously choose, or is it just your personality trait? And now you're like, it how we convince ourselves of things that we already are, and then it just, I don't like the word manifest, but then it manifests that way because that's our personality. So which one do you think it is?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a mix of both. I mean, I don't put on a facade. I know that for sure. I think I very much like who I am, and I like the fact that I have a serious side to me, but normally a majority of my day is being a little bit more whimsical, a little bit more loose. I don't think of myself, I think of myself highly, but I don't take myself too seriously, essentially. Like, even if I'm on a call with someone new, I'll joke around. When I'm on stage, I'll throw out a couple of swear words here and there, which can kind of piss off the agency I'm represented by. But, from time to time, I'll do that. I think that's something probably that's come to me more through just my cultural upbringing. Again, like brother is the same way, mom's the same ways. Celebrities I've gravitated towards watching are very similar to that. Movies that I enjoy watching have characters that are very much like that. I think all of that has come into shaping my personality. Um, but my personality's also changed, right? My early 20s, I just remember being a lot more in some ways immature in terms of, I'd be on stage and perhaps I wouldn't say I don't know as often. I'd be on stage and I would come off maybe a little bit arrogant at times. Versus now I find myself to be quite more reasonable, like where again, I'll preface answers properly if I don't know the full answer. I will share my opinion, but I will always tell the audience that I'm open to them disagreeing with me. I enjoy Q&A far more now than I ever did because I find that's where the real value of a talk comes from. And I'm more empathetic. I'm more empathetic generally with people, and I can relate to people a little bit better because of that. And again, a lot of my empathy was built up by building a company and having people leave the company because they couldn't work with me. And so that very quickly teaches you how to figure out how to manage people, but also how to connect and relate to people, especially those that work with you. So I think those are kind of some of the differences. But again, room for improvement still, right? There's a ton of room for improvement across the board. And I'm very cognizant of that and want to work on it going forward.
Gotcha. By the way, this is how I brain works. It's like, I just realized it's like when you say something, it sounds like I am, interviewing like a sports star, because that's how they end it. And they're like, and I'm not like, I say that genuinely.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, to be fair, man, I watch so many sports interviews that actually just could be a bug from them. I will say one thing that I don't like about sports interviews that I've now actually started kind of keeping in the back of my mind when I answer questions is they say the words a lot. A lot of times when you hear an athlete talk to like the press especially, they're like, oh, this, oh, and like they start off by saying, It's almost like a kind of in some ways how people say too many times. It's almost like a tick that a lot of athletes typically say. So I really have tried to stay away from that, but I can see kind of why my style of doing interviews could kind of be resembling how an athlete would do theirs.
If I was to, download your brain into 3 key fundamentals of how to make a good speech, what would those 3 fundamentals be?
Number one, it has to be know your content inside out. Again, you don't need to know everything, but you do need to be a subject matter, I believe, to be a speaker. And the best people when it comes to being a subject, quote unquote, expert are people who've actually done the thing they're talking about. So, and this is controversial because I know there's a ton of career speakers, people whose full-time job is speaking. I sometimes look down upon those people, and I'll be frank about it, because a lot of times people who speak on stages have not actually done the things they talk about, right? People who talk about management, who've never actually built a company and managed a team. That happens more often than you know. So I look at those people in a very different bucket than people who've actually done what they say they're doing or what they're telling the audience to do. Because I find those people to be more compelling because they bring examples, they bring personal anecdotes, they bring things from their past that gives you a very concrete and relatable example to build from. So that'd be number one. I think number two, have fun, right? Don't take yourself too seriously on stage. Put a smile on, make jokes. Even if people don't laugh at your joke, laugh at your own joke. It's fine. They likely will laugh at you laughing at your own joke if they don't laugh at the joke. Right? Have fun on stage, because the more fun that you have, the more fun the audience will have. That's what I learned from debating as well. My brother actually told me this in grade 8 when he was literally at my national final. He said, you guys might not be the most informative team, but judges are going to love hearing you debate because you guys are the most fun team. Because when you're on stage and you talk, you look like you're having the best time of your life. And that energy projects to the audience. So that would be number two. And then number three, I personally am the fan of mixing up how I do my speeches. So if you are someone that does keynotes a lot, I would recommend not just doing a keynote, but add in a fireside chat where you bring a moderator and you have them, ask questions to you. You can then share your answers, and you can maybe even ask the moderator questions. If you're someone that has never done Q&A before, do more Q&A. It'll challenge you and it'll make you a better speaker over time. If you're just doing the same keynote with the same slide deck that you've used year over year over year, things are going to get monotonous. People aren't going to request you to come back and speak, and you're not going to be taking challenges that make you a better speaker over time.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, because I definitely have seen the last one, which is like the same slide deck, and then you visit that one, and then like 10 days later they post on their Instagram story, like it all looks like a hype, but it's the exact same thing. And I'm like,
the exact same thing.
Like I don't know, I as an audience member I don't want to be there.
No.
So I get it.
Typically, by the way, I've always gravitated away from keynotes because I, as an audience member, always loved a variance in speaking styles and a variance in the content being shared. Meaning, if every other person is bringing a slide deck, what makes you stand out is not having a slide deck. If everyone is doing a keynote speech, what makes you stand out is having a moderator come up so that people are going to clock in and out, but they're going to do that because you have a different person now speaking as well. And it changes up the pace of the talk overall. It could even make things more energetic and engaging. And you can joke around with the moderator as well. And hopefully they're humorous. Hopefully they have some charisma that they can bring on stage as well.
So like a pattern interrupt. Kind of.
Exactly. Because that's typically when people clock in, right? Maybe this is just me speaking as an audience member, but I typically get bored when I hear someone literally go on and on and on in a monotonous way for like 30, 40 minutes in the same pace, the same tone, the same way of speaking. I get bored.
Like that was cool for like everyone. I don't know how everyone put up with that. I'm like, no, trust me. Like I'm like, I cannot do this. Like my brain would clock out.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you also mentioned that because I don't know, maybe the full episode's come out now, but I saw the trailer for the Lex Fridman interview with Mark Andreessen. And the funniest thing is that Lex Fridman is known to speak in a very slow way, while Mark Andreessen is known to speak in a very fast way. So the jokes in the YouTube, and not YouTube, on Twitter, the jokes that were coming on thread were like, oh my God, I have to go from literally putting 1.25x YouTube speed to now going to 0.25 and just switching that up every speaker. And I was like, that's hilarious.
You know what's funny? This is something I used to think that, how we have this slight egotistical games with ourselves, which is like, I listen to a podcast on 3x. Right?
Exactly.
Proper. And then literally this is when my ego got checked yesterday. I click on the Mark Andreessen's podcast. I'm like, you know what? 1.25. Nope.
No, not possible. Not possible at all.
Like that guy just go. Anyway, you have tried, apart from the accomplishments, you have tried a lot of businesses. Tried, failed, tried, success, tried, failed. There was this company, I believe it was Surf, where it was around a very different concept of data. So what is the difference between Facebook, which is the first party data, versus what is zero party data?
Yeah, great question. So Facebook, by the way, has not been in the first party data space throughout. Facebook started off in 2008 as a company that gave you a very clear value exchange. Facebook said, we're going to absorb your data, and in exchange, we are going to give you this incredible ability to connect with your friends. And everyone came on and said, okay, you know what, that's fine. Then in 2010, ads started rolling in more and more. Their entire ads model took this huge transformation. A lot of other social media companies popped up and they followed the same monetization strategy, get users at a certain scale, then turn on ads and bring brands in. And the value exchange started to change quite a bit. Because now I have other platforms I could be on to meet my friends and share what I believe or what I like. But what these big data companies are now taking from you is not just your data, they're taking your attention. And they're monetizing that without giving you anything back. So all you're getting now is the ability to connect with your friends. And what they're getting is your data, which then powers the algorithms that they have to then give you an ad every once in a while. So over time, I think I started to feel like when you look at the revenue that these big companies were making off our attention and off our data, it just didn't feel equitable anymore. It didn't feel fair anymore. So I think that was the core principle behind Surf is we built this extension The extension would operate on any major web browser, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, Microsoft Edge, whatever. And you would be able to surf the web like you normally do. You'd share your data with whatever browser you were using. For example, Chrome, you'd still be sharing your data with Google. But thankfully, if you had the Surf extension on, you would get points because you're also sharing your data with us. You're sharing your data with us, though, in an anonymized way. So we don't even know your first and last name when you download our extension. And you're getting rewarded passively with points that you can then use for items, for gift cards, for discounts, etc. So that's the kind of core principle behind what we built is tell people that they're being tracked, give them the ability to control what they do and don't share, and then finally, and most importantly, compensate those people for the data that they share.
Okay, and I generally don't understand, I would say, almost anything about how the tech industry works. I'm like an outsider, like peeking in, not even looking in. But this is something, when you said about transparency, I think currently we kind of are at a stage which is like, all right, we need to actually be very transparent and develop this trust with the world. But this was not 3 years ago. This was not 5 years ago. So how do you foresee something like that? Or are you just like, hey, it's a hole in the market and I'm just going to go after it? Like, what's the philosophy that makes you go after that? Or like just like logic?
We weren't the first ones to figure this out. There was a browser called Brave browser that compensates people with basic attention token. I think we, however, wanted to do things differently from Brave because we didn't want to build a separate browser. Like the reality is most people are still going to download Chrome. They're still going to use Safari and they're not going to move off it. They're not going to move off to Brave because they love their existing browser too much or they just don't care. But I think Honey, the rewards app Honey, showed to us that people do like loyalty and they do like these rewards platforms. So we felt like, why not build an equivalent to Honey almost, but do that on these major web browsers and then do things that Honey doesn't do in terms of tell people what data we share, give them the ability to control it, and then obviously compensate people properly for their data. So I think we saw definitely a hole in the market. But again, it wasn't like we were the only ones building this space. We just looked at everyone else and said, we can do it better and do it in a different way.
Okay. And I actually wanted to ask you about this. Like, help me understand what went wrong with Honey. Because at some point, Honey was everywhere. And like, I think it was synonymous with David Dobrik as well. So I understand that, hey, I download this browser extension, I get some discount coupons or whatever. But what went wrong there?
Well, I mean, so many things went wrong with Honey. I think one, obviously there's a lot of things popping up about how they work with influencers and a bunch of influencers saying that model was unfair, they didn't get paid on time, et cetera, et cetera. I think two, Honey's business model itself, they do collect consumer data and they don't really disclose that. And they don't do a good job of telling people what they collect or even giving people the ability to manage and control that data, which is incredibly problematic. So that's a huge red flag. And then I think the final thing is there are a lot of companies I spoke to who were reward partners with Honey who actually were pissed off because they felt like Honey was actually eating into their margins more so than ever before. i.e., imagine you're a company and you're giving a 20% off discount code to Honey and you're saying, okay, Honey, go and give it to your consumers, get them excited about it. What a lot of brands actually found is that a lot of consumers using that 20% off discount code probably would have bought at full price. But now because Honey is giving them upon checkout this code, that's what's making them be like, oh, I'm going to apply the 20% discount code and I'll get it off like I'll buy it for 80% of the value. So what we personally at Surf actually felt would be better is if Honey gave you that discount code at the beginning of the shopping experience. So when you come onto that website for the first time, that's when you know that there's available discounts because you're more likely to get people then who are like, oh, I'm now interested in shopping from this brand because I know there's a discount versus giving the discount upon checkout is kind of useless because those people got all the way to the checkout stage and most likely would have already converted at full price. So I think that was another big issue behind Honey that I don't know if they've solved it yet. Honestly, I haven't gone and looked at the updated experience, but I know early on, a lot of reward partners were quite frustrated with that part.
And I didn't quite catch when you said that basically, tell me if I'm wrong, but like you said, Honey was basically giving the discounts up front. So that kind of devalue the brand because it was just like transactional. I'll get 20% discounts, and so I'll just go to this. And you were saying that for Surf, it was like, we don't give you upfront discounts. We don't give it to you at checkout, I believe, but somewhere in between.
Yeah, we give it to you at the beginning of your shopping experience. We'll tell you that we have relevant offers or discounts. We're not going to do it upon checkout. And then another thing to note is that all of the reward partners that came on gave us a discount that was entirely exclusive to Surf. You could not find it on Honey, and you could not find it on the company's website. Because that was, by the way, another thing is that Honey didn't always have like unique exclusive discounts that you can't find anywhere else. They initially started with that model, but later on they just started adding in a bunch of junk, in my opinion, that you could find on the brand's website or find on any of these other affiliate networks out there.
Gotcha. Okay. And this is something when I was like just reading some stuff I found interesting is like 96% of Americans opted out of, giving their data when Apple released the update. What does
iOS
that
14.5, yeah.
Yeah, so what does that tell you about like, the mass psychology? Because 96% is like, it might as well be 100%.
Yeah. Oh, of course, it's a lot of people. Look, I think privacy is important, and I think a lot of people don't think about privacy every day. So I don't think it's as important as some people think. I think a lot of people download apps these days without even knowing what data they're sharing. And some people are fine with that. Some people aren't. But I think a vast majority of people actually don't care about their privacy every single day, which is a problem in my opinion. But again, I can't change people's minds. If people want to do that, then so be it. But I also think at the same time that it's going to show companies that if you want somebody to give you their data, you need to be honest with them about it, but you also need to show them what's in it for them. A lot of people opted out of iOS 14.5 when the pop-ups would show up being like, let Facebook track you. They would be like, no, because they didn't know what was in it for them, right? They didn't know what was in it for them. There was not a strong and compelling reason to do it. They didn't also, by the way, fully understand at times what was actually being tracked and what was not being tracked. So you need to be, as a brand, incredibly intentional on telling consumers that information. Because if you want their data, you need to make sure that it's in their best interest as well to share that.
So just like fundamentally, if speaking from a human behaviors perspective, like incentivizing people and kind of developing the trust, like this is transparent and hey, this is what you'll get, this is what we'll get. And
Exactly.
so I would assume that is also like, if that is the case, it seems like a win-win. Then why is it that most companies are not doing it? Is it because they're just too big to adapt? Is it because they don't see the opportunity, or like?
I don't know. I mean, I think some companies are getting around to it now where they're kind of explaining to people, okay, this is like the, I button beside enabling cookies, and here's what we do with the data you share when you accept cookies. Like they're doing that. I think candidly, a lot of companies aren't doing the incentive part where they're giving incentive to share data. But that's where, by the way, we did work with companies like Amazon Prime Gaming and Electronic Arts and Riot Games, HP, Hewlett Packard. Like we worked with those companies on our giveaways product at Surf, right? Because with Surf, we had our extension, but then we also had giveaways. And we did big sweepstakes and big giveaways for big companies, because a lot of these big companies were trying to collect emails and phone numbers, but they had an incentive. The incentive was the big prize that you would potentially get if you shared your email. So while I'm saying that a majority of companies haven't gotten around to the incentive model, there are some companies that have actually done a great job showing what those incentives could be. And those incentives don't even need to be direct rewards. Those incentives could be giveaways that you do every single month to collect one piece of information that you can then use for retargeting later on.
Gotcha. And you mentioned cookies. Honestly, like what are cookies? Like I always click on them and like accept cookies, sometimes don't accept cookies, like, but fundamentally, what are cookies?
Cookies essentially are a tag that allow the company that you are accepting cookies for to understand what you are doing on that website, where you came from, where you go afterwards, and what you do on the website. So the reason that a lot of companies want you to accept cookies is because they want to be able on a system level to understand what you clicked, how your cursor was moving on the site, which certain platforms like Hotjar allow them to understand fully. and also build heat maps around that data. And then they know what parts of their site they need to fix, what parts of their site that they need to not make as, maybe, got to make the site smaller. I got to make it less condensed. The load speed time wasn't great. A lot of people were rage clicking here. They weren't able to actually get to the proper page they wanted to. They can take all of that data and make better decisions around how they set up their website and how they go about orienting you down that path to purchase, essentially.
Gotcha. That's actually very interesting. I did not know that, genuinely. Would that be the equivalent to, Facebook has this, like Facebook ads has Pixel?
Yeah.
Would it be pretty similar or no?
Pretty similar, yeah. And also, to be fair, like a lot of companies do set up a pixel on their website as well, right? Because they want to be able to track from people, if you're running Facebook ads, how many people actually came all the way from a Facebook ad to your website. You need to enable a pixel on both sides. So attribution at the end of the day is what brands care about, right? They want to know if people have bought, how many people bought, and then they want to know how many people actually came on their website, and then they want to know how many people clicked on their ad. Because you have numbers across each one, you now are able to develop a funnel where you're able to immediately know how many people saw your ad, how many people clicked on the ad, how many people were on your website, how many people finally checked out. And you're able to see the math unfold to know exactly how much you have to spend at the top, at a top level, to then get an appropriate amount of customers or an appropriate amount of sales at the bottom.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that part I understand. That I can link up. Now, you have been in the startup space. You understand it very well. What is the difference between scaling and growing?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, things are similar, scaling and growing. I think scaling more so relates to taking your business model and 10xing it, which also means growing your company, right? Typically, you're going to add headcount. You're going to spend more money on marketing. You might be spending more money on product. You might be coming up with new product lines. So it's a very similar term, but I think scaling refers, in my opinion, to a little bit more of this hyper growth. You're not just growing, you're growing quickly when you scale. And you're looking to, again, 10x, 15x, the type of valuation, let's say if you're a private company that you had in a previous round to the new round that you go out and raise a year or 2, 3 years later.
That is something you mentioned in the book as well, which is you really 10x or 15x, that's scaling. But then why do most businesses, either they don't do it, either they are unable to do it? Why is there such a separation? And is it because, hey, it's just tech? It's if you have the right, let's say the product and the tactics and everything, people are able to, with the right fuel, the marketing behind it, you can just blow it up. So what am I missing here?
Well, I mean, a lot of companies aren't able to scale or grow for many reasons. I think number one, there's external market conditions. You got a pandemic, and you're a service-based business like a restaurant. Well, good luck, but things are going to be obviously very tough for you. You have a recession. People aren't spending as much in a recession. If you're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand selling suitcases, you're probably going to have a really tough time selling luxury suitcases to a population that might not even be able to put food on the table. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think a lot of people also have to go through competition. If you're a first mover in a space, you're not always going to be the first mover. And if you're looking to scale, you also have to know that at the point where you start scaling and you're doing really well, you're going to attract other players to come into the space. And I think it was Peter Thiel who mentioned in his book 0 to 1 that, we talk a lot about the first mover advantage. We don't talk as much about the last mover advantage. Typically the company that comes in near the end that sees the mistakes that all the first movers did and sees what is working and what's not and where things are trending typically comes out to be the winner in the space. And I think he pointed to even Facebook as an example of this, right? Facebook wasn't the first social media platform out there. Friendster, MySpace, all of these platforms existed before Facebook, but Facebook was able to very quickly see what worked and what didn't work and how they could separate themselves to become incredibly beneficial and lucrative to people. And again, they also made the right acquisitions to constantly stay ahead of the curve, where they acquired a company like Instagram because they were like, oh my God, they're only at 1 million users, but this is fundamentally very different from Facebook, and we need to get into this space around photos and video curation, which could fuel what we do later on. And then I think number three, companies might have a hard time scaling and growing Because management comes into play, right? Managing a company that's 10, 20 people is very different from managing a team that's 100, 500, 1,000 people. The most people I've ever managed as CEO was 36 people, but now I'm part of a company like Parallel where we're 103 people, and I'm an executive at the team, and I manage a 14-person marketing team, but I also work with our product team. I work with our art and design team, and it feels very different from what I was doing at Surf, where we were a 36-person team overall. So I can only imagine that as you're scaling and growing, candidly, there's some people that aren't built to be great managers, and they might need to bring other people in, or they might have to intensely learn. But that also affects scaling and growing at a certain level. If people don't want to work at your company, if you're not an attractive place to work, that might halt your ability to scale and grow quite quickly.
Gotcha. Now, in your book, I believe this is the first time I have read this word, entrepreneurship. What is the difference between entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship? And
Yeah, put simply, entrepreneurship is about building something, but you're doing it outside the confines of a big company, or you're doing it outside of the confines of a corporation. You're building something new, you're incorporating a new company, you're starting something from scratch. Versus with entrepreneurship, it's having that same mindset of building something new, but doing it within the confines of a business, a pre-existing business. So I point to a lot of examples. I mean, one of the most famous examples is WeChat, right? WeChat was started by an employee of Tencent. It was not started by the CEO of Tencent. And now WeChat makes a majority of Tencent's annual revenue. It's the biggest social media app, at least in Asia, if not just in China. And it's one of the biggest in the world overall in terms of number of users and daily active users. That app is something that I would say a lot of people would probably want to pay attention to, because the way it started again was from like this grassroots level of an employee coming up with an idea and then being embraced by the management team to go and test it, build it, scale it, and grow it. So that's what I argue that more companies should do, is they should find the creative and innovative people at their company. And the irony is that typically in your interview process, you're asked about your entrepreneurial experience, but a lot of people don't even get to show it in a big company. But I would say if you actually go out and empower those people to set up their own team, to poke holes in your business and then go and solve those issues internally by empowering them to go and come up with innovative solutions and fund it and allow them to test it, you do a far better, especially in certain departments.
And I remember in your book, you mentioned that this is exactly what you encouraged in your company. And when I read that, did you is this something that was of your own, you devised it or yourself? Because I also remember, I believe it was Jeff Bezos. I could be wrong here. But it's I think he said that if they had to decline an idea, they had to write a 2-page thesis about that. That why they are, and again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not really sure about the person, but I was like, that's interesting, because I'm like, most people are not even open to ideas. Now, you mentioned managers being open to ideas. Tell me if my thinking is wrong here. I think people have, at least after they age, they have fixed personality traits. So someone like you, I think you're high in openness. Now, if a manager is not high in openness, no amount of training is going to solve that. No amount of you can give him the best ideas. He'll be just like a very conservative person. So in that situation, wouldn't it be more, just optimize for high openness? Because if you want ideas, then you just fundamentally optimize for managers who are high in openness instead of trying to, preach to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a balance though, because you don't want managers as well who are like, oh my God, things are wrong, we need to solve this in a radically different way. Sometimes the solution is simple, and sometimes the solution doesn't even need to be come up. You don't have to come up with a solution tomorrow. So you got to find pragmatic people typically to be managers. You got to find empathetic people, but you got to find, like you said, open-minded people who are going to empower their team to go if you spot an issue, don't just say, it's not in my backyard, moving on, someone else will fix it. Be the type of employee to go and proactively think of what can we do to fix this, especially if it's a big issue. And even if the solution is bring in other people from different departments and have a call about it, that's fine. But you want to find people who are going to do something about big issues, especially if you're an early stage company. But obviously, even if you're a big company, you want that even more because you probably have bigger problems and you have more bureaucracy, which means sometimes the bigger problems don't always come up to the top. And that's where you really want those people to be empowered on the grassroots level to do something about it.
Gotcha. And there was, I think, something I was really curious about is what is your mental framework of dealing with people? Like, maybe, and I mean this in all sorts of ways, maybe it is something, let's say you don't like someone did in your company, or maybe in your personal life as well. Or maybe you have a framework of, let's say if someone brings me an idea, this is how to treat that idea. Can you help me understand maybe different frameworks on how you deal with people in difficult or just like even neutral circumstances, which most people might not be good at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think two things come to mind there. One, I try to diffuse situations, which means if I really feel like I'm the person who perhaps made a mistake, I do upfront apologize for those kind of situations. And I think it's important to do that because a lot of times when you talk to someone, and by the way, this also goes for situations where maybe you don't even feel like you made a mistake. But again, like, it's important to still sometimes apologize for how you made people feel because sometimes you don't even realize it yourself. And I think it's good to lead with that because it diffuses the situation and it makes the other person know that you genuinely are looking to resolve things with them. So I think that's one is I lead with empathy, which means coming into the conversation, I apologize or I apologize again for how I made someone feel. And I try to relate, I try to put myself in their shoes around how they felt so they know that I'm understanding where they're coming from. Because a lot of frustration, by the way, it can escalate if the other person feels like you don't even know what you did was wrong or you can't relate to them. Like you don't understand where they came from. So I think that's number one. And then number two is I try as much as possible in difficult situations to provide solutions. But again, I don't try to do that in like a unilateral way. I don't just say like, here's the next steps, by the way, we're going to do this or this or this. I try to propose ideas and then hear from the person that I'm talking to around what they think, right? Do they have any steps that they want to go and explore? Do they agree with my next steps? Is there anything they want to add? Because it's great to recognize the problem, but it's also important to mutually come to what the next steps are together. So the person that maybe isn't engaged or doesn't feel respected or had a bit of a falling out, they know that they're part of the solution as well, and they can contribute to that solution on how you move forward together. So those are two things. But again, I also think at the same time, like there's some disagreements that just sometimes never get solved. And by the way, there's some disagreements that never get solved the next day. And sometimes time is important, a month, 6 months, 1 year. Sometimes you got to give time to let, people's egos come down, to let people think in a way where they can actually process what happened properly. Sometimes people can come to that solution in a day or two. Sometimes it takes them 1 year. Sometimes it takes them 10 years. But I think that's also why the second thing that I mentioned around coming to a solution mutually is important. Because if you come off like the person who's like, okay, we're done, let's find a solution and we're back to normal tomorrow, you're again going to go back to somebody who potentially is going to be like, you don't understand where I'm coming from and how you actually made me feel.
And I'm not name dropping just for the sake of it, but the moment you explain that, I literally saw a reel from Alex Hermosi yesterday. And this is interesting for me because his take was, again, I don't have the most context on the man, but his take was completely different, which was, and I think I understand why, because he's hardcore logical, which is he's like, if someone did, let's say, an action X, which no one liked in the company and multiple times, then I'm like, now I have to deal with you. You have taken up my time. So now the goal of this 15 minutes, 20 minutes is for me to just walk out where you change your behavior. I don't care about your intent. I don't care. It came across like that is I don't care about understanding you. It's just that you did X, 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 X. Next time, if these situations happen, you do Y, and that's the only thing I care about. Now, do you think that's effective? But do you? This is what I was asking myself. Is like, is that a great way to go, or it depends?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, what do you think though? Like, would you suggest to people that they take that approach?
No. This is what I think is like, I think when you're dealing with people, then there is some level of empathy that, like, if I try to understand you, you by default try to understand me, and that does lead to, like, it's basically, let's if I reverse this behavior, I'm like, if you do the XXXXX, now do Y, that's like, that person will do it. Maybe they're scared about their job or whatever it is. It's the logical way to go about it. I removed all emotion. I think about it like an equation, and they will do it out of force, but not because they've convinced themselves that it's a good thing. And I know both work, because there are people who are just like hardcore logical, which means that they are able to perform at a level that most people cannot because emotion is involved. But there are also empathetic people who deal with people, which means I assume the long-term effects of that would be that people just, they're like, hey, he dealt with me like a human being. So I can understand both.
And I think the latter is more important for me, because even if things don't get resolved, I would never want someone to feel like this person dealt with me like I'm just a number, like I'm employee number 38, I'm employee number 50. I would want people to be like, you know what, Swish came out of its way to understand the situation, apologize for whatever they did, but also to listen to my perspective and then listen to what I thought the next steps could be, and to try to brainstorm what those could be. And even if things didn't work out, even if we weren't able to resolve the situation, I would feel better if the other person just acknowledged that and was like, thank you for at least trying to fix the situation, versus, this is terrible, you didn't do anything to actually relate to me or to make me feel like I was valued or to understand where I was coming from. And on top of that, I still don't see us moving forward or doing stuff together or working together going forward. So I think, again, life is about, in my opinion, coming to agreements with people, but it's just worth noting that there are going to be people in the world who you just don't get along with. There are going to be people who don't like you for whatever reason. There are going to be people who you did wrong to, or people who did wrong to you, that you are not going to end up meeting, working with, talking to, maybe forever or maybe for a very long time. And that's fine. But the one thing that I think is important is, when you look back at your life, to just feel like you took accountability when you needed to. You tried to lead with empathy and positivity throughout, and you respected people who said, I want to continue to work together, and you equally respected the people who said, I don't want to continue to work together, if that's what they want.
If I was being honest with you, whatever you explained to me, I think I was just completely focused on whatever you said, like, during this entire time, because I think, and I'm curious as well, I think you are pretty mature than most people your age. The logical reason, obviously, is because, hey, you have had just like way more life experience, so to say, than most people in a very short span of time. Do you think it's also something else, or it's just like, hey, I went through these experiences, you build a company, you deal with people, it's just too many data points, and it makes you realize way more than other people? Or is it something else as well?
I think building a company definitely helps, right? I had people who left who just couldn't work with me, who felt like I was brash, who felt like I was messaging them over the weekend and telling them to do work. And they were like, what are you doing? Like, this is not what an employee should be doing. I have a quote unquote 9 to 5, but I also have a weekend where I need to relax, be with my family, be with my friends, and you're disrupting that. So for whatever reason that people left, and again, they gave me feedback, I tried as much as possible to absorb that and over time build my way of working with people that was a result of not only what has worked, but more importantly, what hasn't worked in the past. But I am still a work in progress, right? And I think you know that. Like I still at times don't respect people's time, scheduling things, being on time even. Like I try to be on time, but candidly, there's just times where I'm not. And this isn't just professionally, it's personally with my friends. There's things even in my life when it comes to like, I don't cook. I wish I cooked. I want a pet down the road. I think having a pet would make me even more disciplined and more mature. So there's, I'm a work in progress in so many ways, and I recognize that. But again, I also know that tomorrow I can't fix everything, right? So for me, it's always been about these small actions. I make a mistake, I write it down, I process it, I internalize it, I try to not make that same mistake. And over time, hopefully in the grand scheme of life, I will come out to be more and more mature every year.
Awesome, man. I that's a great answer. That's actually a great answer because sometimes you come across people, they have no accountability, none. And I'm like, this is something I've at least realized in life is like, it's actually great where, like both people, they take accountability for both the things and it's great. And then it's like, if that is not in sync, I'm like, those people, no matter what, are, at least from my personal perspective, are at least over a long, after you've given them the benefit of the doubt and, over a course of time, if they don't, then I think they're not worth having, even if they're the nicest people.
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I've had people in my life who I've actively cut out because I just feel like, they are making mistakes when dealing with me, but they're constantly doing the exact same ones. I'd be fine if it was different mistakes, by the way, because that's being human, but if it's the same thing, like you mentioned, it's, I made plans with this person and then ended up last minute canceling on me. But they've done this now for a year in a row where like I've constantly given them feedback. I've told them even, hey, like this is disrespectful. This is not working for me. And I've told them that multiple times throughout a year or two or whatever, and they're still not changing their ways. Even if they're the nicest person when you hang out with them, when you eventually hang out with them, even if they're the nicest people, they're just not worth having in your life because all the nice things they do sometimes don't fully add up to all the ways they made you feel throughout that year. And most importantly, the frustration that you might have when those mistakes again are the exact same that you've already pointed out before.
Yeah, no, I deeply am with you on that. Like, trust me, it's like I want people around me whom I can be like, hey man, you did that. I did not like that. And I genuinely care about you. I want you to fix that. And I know I cannot change you. But it's like, if you're going to be around me, it has to be, it's not like even you have to reach high standards today, but please acknowledge it. Slightly fix it. Show me the evidence. Like, I'm on your fucking team. Like, please, let's do this together. But it's like, if not, then.
And the most important thing to that then is also holds me accountable, right? So in the same way that I'm holding you accountable, well, hold me accountable too, right? If I say, you know what, we're going to set a goal of working out together every week and I cancel on you again and again and again, call me out. Be like, dude, like you wanted to work out together. You haven't come once in 3 weeks now. What's going on? Right? Like I think there's a way to do that. And honestly, the people who typically figure out how to do that in a constructive way tend to be the people that become the best of friends. It's like, if you can have those difficult combos, but both sides recognize that you're calling someone out because you're looking after their best interests, that's the epitome of trust in a relationship and a great way to define it.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you have been, content. That's your absolute game in whatever.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube podcast. Now, 5 C's of content. I know you wrote that about in your book. But if you were to explain me why each of those C's are important and why each of those should be there, why is it not 4? Why is it not 3? Why is it those exact 5?
Yes. So the 5 C's, I mean, starting with content. Content is king. I think if you don't have high quality content, you are likely going to be just another person sharing something and you're not going to stand out. So for again, our podcast is a good example of great content, right? High production value. Typically podcasts aren't done on a high production value. We wanted to go all out in the motorsport space and say, you know what? We're going to bring our 4K cameras. We're going to travel to wherever our guests are located. We're going to do everything in person, and we're going to shoot with the proper audio, lighting, and camera equipment that no other motorsport podcast typically does. That's number one. Number two, context. I think context is incredibly important when level setting with your audience on your perspectives. If you're someone who's sharing your opinion with the world, you're sharing on LinkedIn, for example, what you think of the stock market, what you think about crypto, what you think about AI and gaming, or whatever it is. It's important to always preface your thoughts with context, meaning, why are you the person that should talk about this? Can you lend any of your pre-existing expertise to this topic that allows people to view your post now in a different way? Oh, this isn't just someone talking about AI willy-nilly. This is the person who's done a ton of research in the space. They work in the space. They've invested in the space. That context is incredibly important to build credibility. Number three, community. I think community, by the way, is the way that I grew primarily on LinkedIn. Commenting back to people, making them feel valued for their attention, doing giveaways, doing meetups. We did over 40 meetups around the world, a lot of them in Toronto, where I met my community. I spoke to my community. I created content with my community. That makes a difference, because now somebody who comes across your post is not just going to say, this is some avatar that keeps on sharing 2 posts a day. This is Swish. I know Swish. I was on a call with Swish. I met Swish. I love Swish. He's cool. He relates to me. Me and him jammed about X topic or Y topic. You're going to get people going from being quote unquote followers to people who are your advocates, who are your ambassadors, who are fans truly of you. So that's number 3. Number 4 is collaboration. Instead of going and building out an audience just on your own, I think it's great to always collaborate with other creators. Their audience sees your work, your audience sees their works. You're now starting to build together, and that's incredibly impactful. And finally, the most important thing outside of community, in my opinion, this is more mindset, is consistency, right? You said you want to post, you said you want to, engage with your community, you want to produce high quality content, you want to do it with context. Now show that you can do it over a long period of time, because people in today's world, again, they're not downloading as many apps as they were before. They're not following as many pages as they were before. They're incredibly selective on what they engage with, what they don't engage with, what they consume, what they don't consume. What they typically want are people who are going to be in their lives providing quote unquote value for a long period of time. Not people who come on, share a ton of value, and then you don't hear from them for like 5 months. And then they resurface again saying, it's me, hello, it's me, reintroducing myself for the 18th time in a row now. This is what I do. That's typically not what people want out of creators. So consistency is incredibly important as well.
That is somewhere I actually have a slight difference in opinion. Consistency. Because I was really trying to think through things, and not because it's just of content, but I would say in terms of pretty much everything, and like take it with a grain of salt, like as in like around the concept, not you, but it's like I think consistency is a lie. Because I think we are constantly told that you should be consistent, you should be consistent, you should be consistent. But I think it's because we are not told how to be accurate. And please feel free to disagree with me. But it's like, if I just knew the perfect piece of idea and the craziest idea, and I knew I had the executional skills and I would just do it, it would get, like, in terms of content, I think we understand that if I do something really extreme and it's properly done, it will very high likability of it getting the views, which means consistency was not the thing. Now, obviously, if you keep doing the accurate things consistently, like obviously if you go viral once, like sure, you'll get views, but nothing comes out of it. But constant accuracy is what will really, like, as you mentioned, I would assume that is what you would call scaling. Now, I'm going to contradict myself. I know most people cannot be accurate. So I think is like consistency, just for the sake of consistency, I think it's useless. So it's like consistency through iteration that leads, that is the only way for most people to lead to accuracy, if I'm making sense. But the goal should be to get to accuracy as quick as possible, not just like, hey, I've done this for 300 days in a row. Like,
No, I agree. I think, but I mean, look, I think we can both be right actually, because I agree with you that just posting for the sake of posting is not worth it, right? Just posting without acknowledging that you are at the end of the day going to be getting feedback on your content, whether you like it or not. People are going to comment. People might not even see your content, and perhaps you have to tweak it, change the thumbnail, change the format, change how you distribute and post about it. You might need to do all of that. So I agree with you. I think being consistent doesn't necessarily mean just spew out a bunch of garbage and don't pay attention to how the outcome of those videos or content was. I think it's more being intentional, right? So be consistent, but be intentional with how you go about changing and iterating what it is you're sharing. By the way, you shouldn't change and iterate your style only on the basis of community feedback, because the best creators typically know what people want even when they don't know it, right? So I think you need to be, thinking as yourself, hopefully as a trendsetter if you want, because those typically are going to be the people that eventually break out and become the absolute biggest because they were the first one to do it for a long period of time before that trend caught on. But you also want to be someone who is a realist, where maybe 50% of the creativity comes from within and the other 50% comes from what is working or what people are saying has worked in the past. And you're replicating a little bit of those tactics to put the two together and produce something of value.
Gotcha. And speaking of content, you have, I actually really commend that. Like I would, that's the word, right? Like commend you on that act, that you have shared quite some instances about your life that generally most people would not be comfortable with.
Right.
You have shared about your mental health. You have shared about what it takes to run the company. But there's this one time you said you had experienced a panic attack on an airplane. What is that experience like? Like, walk me through it. What's happening in your brain?
Yeah, it was terrifying. I was actually going to share a reel about this fairly soon on Instagram, but it was around 2021, and it was this experience. This was like a 5-month experience where I started dealing more and more with anxiety, and I started understanding what I was actually going through, talking to friends, looking things up online, having very honest conversations with my family. And once I found out that, okay, this perhaps, panic attack, an anxiety attack, whatever you want to call it, and that this is a fact of life, I started trying to think of how to deal with it. But even in the process of how to deal with it, things weren't always easy. I remember going home to Calgary, spending some time there, resetting my mental and physical life, taking time to just disconnect from work, focusing on just hobbies that I had growing up, dancing, painting, walking, all of this. And once I felt like, okay, you know what, I'm good to go, I ended up taking a flight from Calgary to Toronto. And it was on that flight, literally on the runway, I, had my tea bag, because typically tea is really good to calm yourself down, non-caffeinated tea. But obviously, because we hadn't taken off yet, I didn't have my hot water yet. And I was waiting to go and be airborne until I got my hot water. But I don't know why on the runway, maybe because I was leaving home and, I'd had all these, terrible experiences with anxiety over the last few months, that I didn't want to go back to Toronto and relive them again on my own without my family. Maybe it was the flight itself. I couldn't actually, maybe, it was, I was scared about all the work I had to do when I got back home, and the kind of workload was going to be insane and I was already dreading it. I don't know exactly what triggered my anxiety to kick off, but I was on that plane on the runway and was so close to literally just putting my hand up and saying, I got to deboard. I got to get off this flight. Palms were sweaty, heart rate was running, starting to get a little bit dizzy. And I just looked at the person on my right. She was sitting in the middle row. I didn't actually know, but her husband was sitting in the window seat. But I literally just grabbed this woman's hand and just said, I'm sorry, I'm scared of flying. Do you mind holding my hand? And thankfully, she and her husband were both fantastic people, and they were supportive. They talked me through the takeoff. And then even when we were airborne, they were asking me questions, where are you from? What do you do? What do you like? Why were you in Calgary? All of these questions. I was able to have a conversation with them that really distracted me from how I was feeling. And then again, once we were airborne and I felt pretty fine, I got my hot water, put my tea in, and the rest of the flight was fine. But again, over time, I had to learn how to deal with it. And even now, it's not like I figured it out, but I'm definitely much better off than I was before. I think I'll also credit the fact that I go to the gym every single day as a way through which I get over anxiety. Anytime I feel anxious, anytime I feel overwhelmed, the minute I go to the gym, and whether it's weight training or even just going and running on the treadmill, after the gym, I feel on top of the world. Like I feel incredible and I feel like I can do anything. And that coupled with going to the sauna, doing cold plunges, speaking very honestly about this with my friends and hearing their experiences with it, I think all of that has coupled together to make me feel like I'm now in control of anxiety. And I'm definitely not cured of it because I don't personally believe that there's a cure for anxiety. I think it's a part of life and it'll come in and out of your life. But I think the fact that I can now say that I can control it makes me feel quite proud and quite happy of where I am.
I'm happy for you because I'm sure that's something, until someone has experienced it, I don't think someone understands it. They can try to be there with you or talk to you through it, but I think there are certain experiences where people cannot comprehend it. It's just like experientially speaking. I just broke my flow there. No, but like I genuinely mean that. When you say this is something that you have accepted, and by the way, it's 9:30. So can we have 15 minutes more? I have F1 coming.
Yes, 100%. Let's do it.
Awesome. But like you mentioned anxiety. Now, you seem to at least have accepted the concept that, hey, this is something I have to deal with and these are the ways I deal with it. So do you think that, all these things that you do in your life, which is a lot, that your entire life is just this quest of stimulation with sudden, random moments of anxiety? Because obviously with the great stimulation comes also the downfalls of it.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I will say I do prioritize small wins now a lot. So I do focus on those quite a bit, like hey, I sold my company, or I joined this great job, or I'm interviewing X, Y, that amazing guest, or I released my book, I'm speaking on stage here, I'm investing in this company, I'm doing great on social media, I collaborated with this creator. All of those are great to have. But again, like you mentioned, those don't come as frequently, right? You don't do them every single day. So if 90% of your life in a year is not going to be with those big wins, well, hopefully you're still happy in 90% of the year, or you have something to look forward to, or something to get excited about, or something to be proud of. So I think that's where the small wins matter, right? It's kind of setting almost goals each week. What do I want to accomplish this week, both professionally and personally? And the feeling of picking those things off every week is a win in and of itself and should be worth celebrating. The fact that, you set a goal, I want to go to the gym every day, and you are going to the gym every day, that should put a smile on your face and make you feel like, you know what, I have a great mindset because I said I was going to do something and I did it. And by the way, that also helps you build trust with yourself. And a lot of people, I think they have this idea that, I need to build trust with other people, without realizing that the first person that they need to build trust with is themselves. And the way to build trust with yourself is by promising that you're going to do something and then actually doing it. Hey, I'm going to send out an email. I'm going to do it tonight. I did it tonight. I'm going to go work out today. I actually worked out today. I'm going to go for a walk today. I went on a walk today. I'm going to handle this incredibly difficult conversation that I've been putting off for a long time this week. I had that conversation this week and I got it done. That is how over time you start to build trust with yourself, where at a certain point you just feel like you can do anything because you promised yourself again and again that you're going to get something done, and you've shown yourself that you can do it.
That is very relatable to me, because I think I've been working out consistently, and what I found is, like, now that you really say it, before I started working out, that is something exactly that was on my mind, which is like, okay, and with other things as well, but like, how do you trust yourself? It's like, I said I'll do this, but I did not. Like, everyone has that. But now if I fast forward, I don't even think about it. I'm like, no, I told myself I'll do X and I'm doing like 3X. And I'm like, in between that, kind of my mind lost track, but it just registered those, like, oh, like, fine, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. And like, over a period of time, it's just like, no, I have evidence. Like, it's not even like belief systems. It's like evidence. Like, I will do it tomorrow. I know it. And I think that's exactly what trust is with yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And trust me, that is a superpower in and of itself. Like that feeling that you trust yourself fully to get things done is then what allows you to go and breed trust among other people, right? Because you can kind of look them in the eye and assure them that you're going to get things done because you don't even feel like you're lying to yourself when you say it. So it projects so much to other people, especially also in your confidence in how you appear to people and how you appear on stage if you're a public speaker, and how you appear in work, and how you appear on calls, and how you appear at dinners, and how you appear with parties and everything. Like your, not even physical appearance, just the way, the energy that you project to people, that confidence, it stems really, in my opinion, from the trust that you have in yourself. I mean, that's why, like, when people don't know what they're talking about, you can kind of feel it. You can kind of sense it. If someone doesn't fully know what they're talking about, not only in the way they speak, maybe they stutter here and there, but you can kind of even just see it. Like you can see it in their face. You can see it in the way they talk, versus when you absolutely know something and you hear someone talk about it, based on the energy that they're putting to it, the passion they're breathing to it, the examples they're bringing, that they know what they're talking about. And it's just I think it's a very different scenario. And it breeds again from trust with yourself.
I think we are so much on the same page on this, like the confidence thing, because I think it's like, I really think confidence is just like building evidence, and through evidence you start really trusting yourself, and those evidences have to be small. And the thing you talked about, that when you're with people and you say things, but it's like people say that like, oh, you believe it. Like, because no, it's just because you've done it so many times. And if you break it down in variables, it's just like, oh, the way I spoke, my tonality was not upward inflection. People see that as authority. I'm giving more examples, as you mentioned. And like, it's like, I'm excited and I'm like, okay, like I can talk 2 more hours about this, and people see that. And I think combined, that people see that as like confidence. Now, given on the topic of like building evidence, there is something you mentioned in the book. The best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago. The second best time is today. And most people end up collecting a lot of seeds. How do we cure procrastination, or not even cure, but what's just the first step?
I mean, the first step is to put deadlines in your calendar and then just block your calendar off and get it done then. And it sounds simple, but a lot of people don't even calendar block in 2025. A lot of people don't prioritize what they need to actually get done because they don't even think about what they need to prioritize at the start of a week or on a Sunday evening before the week starts, saying, what do I want to get done this week? Let me write it down. A lot of people don't do that. So I think that's how you solve it, right? You need to be intentional going into the week. What do I want to get done this week? You need to then go into your calendar and you got to block off time to get it done. And then going back to trusting yourself, when you say you're going to get it done 3 to 5 p.m., when you say you're going to get it done 7 to 7:30, you get it done then. And again, if you have to do something across 2 or 3 different sittings, fine. But that also comes from just being intentional with your time. And as you start to do more and more, you'll kind of realize what takes 30 minutes versus what will take 2 hours versus what might actually take multiple days. So I think that's the best solution for it. And I am a type of person where for some things, I'm definitely not as organized. But when it comes to my calendar, when it comes specifically to like getting the most important things done in a week, I do pride myself on that because like I think about it quite regularly and I do write it down. Like even yesterday evening, I just wrote down, I'm like, this is what I want to do for Parallel. This is what I want to do for Track Limits. This is what I'm going to do for Covenant House, which is an organization I volunteer at. This is what I got to do speaking related. Like, this is what I want to do personally in terms of, the workouts that I want to get done and when I want to do them and when I want to recover. I write all of that down so that at the end of the week, I look back and I say, got it all done, or got 90% done. And now I know what I got to move to the next week and really, really prioritize even more.
Now, I know you are an F1 guy, but before that, you have a not to-do list. Most people have a to-do list. Like, explain that to me.
I mean, a lot of people, like I said, they have too many priorities. They have too many things they want to get done. And they look at this overwhelming list, 1-page, 2-page document with a bunch of to-do items. And they're like, oh my God, where do I begin? I'm scared. Or they just don't do the work at all because they don't even know where to start. So For me, I just have things that I just don't need to do. And I make sure I note those, right? Like there's some things I know either I don't have to do it because I'm waiting for someone else, or I don't have to do it right now and prioritize it right now. And I'm going to flag that in my head so that I don't lose control of my week. And so I think that's important. Again, I wouldn't also kill yourself coming up with a list like that. I don't think you need to. I think just having a focused to-do list is the message I'm trying to share here. But I know the best people typically when it comes to time management, sometimes they can get the same amount of work done working 4 or 5 hours a day as somebody else who's working 10, 11 hours a day. I know that for sure. And typically it's because of how they structure their day, calendar blocking, but also how they prioritize their time and how they know what to prioritize based on that introspection, reflection, whatever you want to call it, that they do Monday morning or Sunday evening.
Gotcha. Now, F1. This is your arena. Like quite literally, you've been to all the best arenas. You have talked to the best podcasters, but Lewis Hamilton, he signed a $100 million deal with Ferrari. Help me understand as an outsider, why is it one of the biggest moves in, the past 2 decades in pretty much any sport?
Yep. Yeah, it's the biggest move in sports in my opinion, because I can't think of the last time you had the greatest athlete of all time in their respective sport go to the most iconic team in that sport. You know what? Like at the peak almost of their career. Like this would be the equivalent, I guess, of like LeBron James going to the Lakers, I guess. Except the Lakers aren't that great. But to be fair, they did win a ring in 2020, so fair enough. Like maybe it was around the same time that LeBron moved, he won a ring, which was pretty great. But yeah, Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari is incredible, right? It's the most iconic team in motorsport. And he is, in my opinion, the greatest driver of all time. I mean, I don't think anyone can dispute that statistically. He's the greatest driver of all time across pole positions, across wins, across points accrued over the course of his career. So this is the big news, and I think it's going to drive a lot of people to really pay attention to this year. Also because F1 was really competitive in 2024. We had 7 different race winners, and that hasn't happened for a very, 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 very long time. Actually, I don't even think it's happened ever. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Either they tied the record or it is a record. But it was a monumental year in 2024. And I think everyone's excited that maybe this year is going to bring much of the same. But now you have Lewis in red, and you have a rookie coming into Mercedes who's touted as like the next Max Verstappen. And it's going to be an all-out battle across hopefully 4 teams: McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari again. And everything is on the table. The Drivers' Championship is on the table, and the Constructors' Championship is on the table.
Gotcha. Now you mentioned these 4 teams competing within, like the absolute just neck to neck. But there is a 5th team, Cadillac.
Really? Oh, yeah. I was like, wait, what? Am I missing one?
No, like Cadillac, the company that makes the President's car. What business does it have to do, like getting in F1? Like, help me understand genuinely, like, how is it good for the sport, and like, how does it actually just affect the entire dynamic of, like the teams within themselves, or like, what is it doing?
I think it's great. I mean, I think an 11 team is important because there's been a lot of criticism towards F1, towards 20 drivers might not be enough. There's a lot of young drivers. Maybe not anymore, because there is like 5 young drivers coming into the sport this year, in 2025. But again, for the longest time, there was a big criticism that F1 wasn't letting junior drivers come up. Like there were a bunch of really talented young drivers, even some F2 champions who were sitting on the sidelines and weren't given a full-time fee. So that's number one, is I think an 11 team helps with that. I think it's great that Cadillac and, Andretti are, bringing kind of a US angle as well to the sport. We have Haas, but it's always good to add more teams from outside of Europe so that the sport is truly global. I think this also, by the way, goes for races. The fact that there isn't a race in Africa is an embarrassment, and we need to have a race in Africa to truly call F1 a global sport. And then finally, I think it's also pretty great that Cadillac has this incredible background, similar almost to Audi, in the fact that they are an engine provider, that they build engines, and we need more engine providers in F1. If you look at the last few years, outside of Renault, which is obviously a pretty crappy engine, uh, there's really only been three engine providers, right? You have Mercedes, you have Ferrari, and you have Red Bull. So essentially what you had is, teams that were differentiated more so on their chassis or their overall design of the car, from their front wing all the way back to their rear wing, than the differentiation in their engine quality. And again, if you picked the right engine at the right time, so going back to 2014, if you picked that Mercedes engine when the turbo hybrid era started, you probably did pretty well compared to the teams that didn't. So I think just having more engine providers, the fact that Red Bull now is becoming their own engine provider, the fact that we're going to have Audi come into the sport, and then you have Cadillac, I think it's all fantastic. I think it's only going to make the sport more competitive. I think it's going to add different engine providers, which obviously now adds another point of differentiation between the teams. And I think it's just going to make, hopefully, the sport overall more exciting.
Interesting, because I am someone who started, like, we all know Formula One exists, but I saw Drive to Survive. Man, that was like experientially speaking, like, I keep stuttering that word, but experientially, I'm not going to use that word, fuck it. But like, it was just such a great experience, And now, after Drive to Survive, there is this $300 million movie made, like, starring Brad Pitt. Like, where do you think Formula One is headed? Because this is like an amazing trajectory right now.
Great trajectory. I mean, we'll see how the movie does. I hope it's not cringy, because Gran Turismo was an abysmal movie, and they really, really dumbed it down. They didn't make the sport feel special, in my opinion. So hopefully F1. I mean, the fact that it's very realistic and they are shooting with the real drivers, and they're, Mercedes, along with, I think it was Carlin that built them an F2 car that looks like an F1 car, but it is an F2 car with the exterior looking like an F1 car. I think that's pretty cool. The fact that Brad Pitt's involved, I mean, he's such a phenomenal actor. Hopefully he adds another level of acting that we perhaps didn't see in Gran Turismo. So I think they have the right ingredients, but I just hope that the script and the story of that movie is going to be up to par. But the trajectory of the sport overall is, hopefully they're going to make the sport global. Like I mentioned, we need a race in Africa. I would take off a race from the 24 races and put one in Africa if I was the FIA president. And, I think we need, personally speaking, more teams to come in over the next few years if we want to make the sport even more competitive. I'd like to see F1 Academy produce a Formula One driver who's a woman. I think that should happen, and it should happen hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years. Again, I believe it should be on the basis of meritocracy, but I think it's important that we recognize that females haven't been given the same opportunities as men in motorsport in the past. So I think F1 Academy is doing a great job, but hopefully F1 Academy can look more like Formula 2, so it almost feels like it could be a feeder series into Formula 1 down the road. So there's a lot of things that they still need to work on. But again, overall, the global attention towards F1 has only grown every year. And the fact that we're having competitive seasons is now making the sport even more watchable. And everyone's not going in being like, well, we know Max is going to win. Why are we even watching the race?
Gotcha. And you interviewed Max Verstappen. Now, apart from, that's obviously, like, you started this off like with an idea, and now you're interviewing like the best of the world. But on, just like when you talk to him, what is it that stands out about him? Like the way he thinks, the way his personality is, like what were you able to download about him?
I think it was a very short interview, right? It was about 5-6 minutes in the actual interview. It was about maybe 10-15 minutes overall that I had, time to spend with him. And there was a lot going on. It was at an event. It was at a virtual esports event. And so he had like 50,000 things probably to do. He had to go do a talk on stage. He had to sign autographs. He had to drive on a simulator that they had. Like, he was basically being pulled into one direction after another. But I really respected that, despite the fact that he was being pulled in different directions, and despite the fact that he had come from Abu Dhabi and then Rwanda, he had the prize giving ceremony the day before, and then he flew in that morning to Madrid and immediately went to the event from the airport, and still was energetic, and still asked me where I was from, and still was incredibly courteous and kind. It meant a lot. And it kind of went to go and show, hopefully, to me, and again, everyone I've spoken to about this, that he isn't how he's portrayed in the media. He's absolutely a very competitive guy, but from what I saw, at least, he was very gracious, very kind, soft-spoken, and genuinely like a person who I'd love to have a drink with, like someone who was very, very kind. So that was my read on it. Again, and maybe if I spend a bit more time, I'll have more insights to share. But I just enjoyed that experience, and to be able to get the call from Heineken a week before I had to fly out. Hey, do you want to do this? Was pretty crazy. And then obviously flying out, getting the interview opportunity, doing it was kind of a good check mark at the end of 2024 to be like, this is a good year.
No, of course, like that's Max Verstappen. Now, this is one last thing that I genuinely wanted to ask you is you interviewed Roman Grosjean, if I'm pronouncing that right, the man who literally walked out of fire. Now, we all are aware of his accomplishments, but what I'm interested in is what's going on in his brain. Like, both from, like, you have to be a genuinely crazy human being, want to just come out of that and be like, I'm back, like, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, what are the after effects of something like that? Like, which we don't see. Maybe you saw some things in person or whatever.
Well, I mean, we didn't talk too much about it, but it's, to be fair, he's been talking about it for a long time now. Like the minute he obviously got back to the paddock, which was like a week later, he was like in a cast with his hand. Obviously, his hand got burned. I did see his hand though. He showed it to us, and it was still you can see the injury still. Like it looked different from a normal human hand, and the fact that he also mentioned that hand from time to time still hurts him when he drives, but the fact that he's still driving is just a testament to the racer that he is. When we interviewed him, he was in IndyCar. And Indy cars, by the way, they typically go faster in a straight line than an F1 car. It's an incredibly thrilling sport, in my opinion. And the fact that he's driving in street circuits, he's driving in ovals, he's driving super fucking fast. And he's driving with a hand that like 3 years ago got burnt down all the way. It's pretty incredible. Also, like you mentioned, right, the mental toll it took on him to then go back into a car, again, shows to the world that this is a true racer, that he truly wants to do this. He loves it. He can't live without it. It's his passion. It's his dream. It's his life. And so I think that's quite inspiring as well. The fact that someone's gone through perhaps one of the worst accidents in recent memory, had survived it, and then has said immediately that they want to get back into a car is pretty damn inspiring.
Yeah, this might sound brutal, but I think some people genuinely have the crazy in them just because of how they are. And I think then there is the rest of the world. But
agreed.
One question I had for you. You do a lot of things. You do a lot of crazy things. You do a lot of fun things. You don't have to answer it if it's personal. But do you know or do you think that you're on the spectrum?
Ooh, maybe. I could I feel like I've been now in this mindset of just like do for a long time now. I don't think it's ever going to quit. I don't think I can ever expect myself to retire at 30. I want to just keep working. I want to keep doing cool things. I want to do it with people I love. I want to do it in areas that I care a lot about. I have big goals, right? Like I've always talked about not just building within entrepreneurship, but also, lending my services back to the communities that have helped me grow, and also volunteering, spending time, perhaps in other industries down the road, building another business, perhaps from the ground up in a totally different industry. And then the long-term goal being running for office. And when I run for office, obviously the goal one day is to run for the top seat in Canada. And that dream, I think a lot of people, might have it, but not a lot of people actually think it's possible. And for me, I guess I'm just crazy enough to feel like it is possible. It's all possible if the right mentality plus hard work plus a little bit of luck all comes together. You never know what's possible.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's absolutely great. By the way, what I did actually mean was, are you actually on the spectrum?
Oh, for what?
Like, like some people are like autistic.
Mentally.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm like, when people talk to me, they do sometimes say that perhaps I'm a little like OCD perhaps, or a little bit ADHD, but like I don't think I'm too. I mean, like I'm very detail oriented, and like yeah, fair enough. Like you put me in a lecture room, and I'll probably fall asleep after 20, 25 minutes, like we talked about. And I do find myself sometimes like where my brain can't shut off, or where I'm thinking much quicker than I speak. So I'm going in like different directions. But at the same time, maybe because of public speaking, I also try to come off concise, and I try to come off like I'm actually sharing differentiated points, and I'm not just rambling on. So I don't know. I don't know if I am, but like I've never gotten myself tested. I've never, you know, gone to a therapist to ask them about that. Um, but maybe I need to down the road. I don't know. But and obviously, like I know that I'm not. If I have to put it very bluntly, like I know I'm not like quote unquote normal, but I don't actually know what I am. Yeah.
No, I know that. That's why I asked you that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
take it with a grain of salt. But again, if it's like, I think you should, if you're curious, find out about it, because I have my strong suspicions about you. I'm not kidding.
It could be interesting. Honestly, it's a good point. Like I might do it later this year. Honestly, I might write that down.
Because I consider myself on like especially I've done quite some like research on you. So now, and by the way, I can turn the camera off if this is too personal. Like,
No, not at all. Not at all.
Cut this out. But anyway, like it's like I pride myself on the fact of figuring people out in terms of how they are wired, especially if they're different. And I definitely think you are on the spectrum. Now, take it with a grain of salt. Like obviously evidence based, but I can see, like I can literally point it out like this is. But yeah, I think if you're curious, I think you should find it out.
I definitely will. If you also have resources like places that you would recommend I check out to
I'll tell you something interesting.
I don't even know where to start, but I know if you Google search it, you'll probably find something. But yeah,
Reddit. And
Reddit.
and I'll tell you why that is interesting, because it's you don't have to trust it, but it will give you data points to just, okay, you know what, that's interesting. I don't have to trust it, but let me just look at people who are different that way. I'll give you one. The way your eyes move, most people's eyes don't move that fast, which means that you think at a pace that is, I think, incomprehensible to most people. So that is why you're able to also talk. And I think since your brain, like, trust me, I can just go deep in this rabbit hole, but it's like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, again, like I mentioned to you, I feel like I've always felt like something's different, but I've never actually gone and done the research or again, sought out professional assistance to figure out what that is. Also worth noting, because like, I don't feel like I'm at that point where I need to control it. You know, I know some people who have ADHD who go and get ADHD pills and stuff like that because they absolutely need that to like lock in and focus. But for me, I don't feel like I need that. But again, never say never. It's A, good to know if you have something, and B, you never know down the road when you might need to seek out medication or whatever it is.
To control certain things.
I didn't even mean it that regard. Like I'm genuinely just like, because I'm obsessed with the human brain. So figuring out, like, it's not just about spectrum, but also like if someone is just like, maybe they're crazy narcissistic, but maybe they're highly logical, like whatever it is. So it's like, I genuinely love understanding how people think.
And I think it's cool. I've done a personality test. I did the Myers-Briggs test a long time ago. I did it maybe like 6-7 years ago. I got ENTJ. And I was like, by the way, on the spectrum of extroverted versus introverted, I was like 98 or 99% extroverted. And then I did it recently. I did it like 3 or 4 months ago. And I'm still ENTJ, but I'm more balanced actually now on the kind of extroverted to introverted side. And maybe that's also because like I could see it, like there were times where I literally would hate spending time on my own or like being at home and not doing anything. And, even being on my own, doing a workout with like, no, that's boring. I want to do it with someone. Versus now, like, there are times where I candidly just like being on my own. I like staying in. I like watching a movie, TV show, working out on my own, doing the sauna on my own, like whatever it is. Like, I think I've become a little bit more introverted, but I still obviously have that extroverted side that I, probably am dominant in. But again, like this stuff is fascinating to me as well, even beyond what's in the mind. I think the fact that like your personality over time can evolve and it can change. And again, that's not just internal, it's based on external conditions, the people you bring into your life, etc. That's all pretty fascinating to me.
No, and by the way, when you say you're more introverted right now, like slightly more. So when you're alone, are you thinking of, even when you're doing your workouts and all, are you thinking of a lot of ideas and like still like,
Typically, Yeah. I'm still moving. I'm still mentally moving, like, and that's why I bring my phone wherever I can. Even I've talked about this a lot. I wish I could have a notepad in my shower because, like, I don't know why I get the best ideas in the shower, and I typically sometimes have to cut my shower short. And I play music when I shower, but like I typically have to cut my shower short, run literally like in my towel to my phone to write down those ideas, and that's happened to me many times. So
Yeah, so just
I have a hunch, and this is the last hunch I have. I don't get my ideas in the shower. I get it, I think so, all the time, everywhere. But I think I've heard that, like, people get ideas in the shower, and it's generally the creative people who say that. And I think it's because of this sensory input, which is like from the shower, which is like, you're feeling it on your skin, but also there is sound, and the sound of shower, like, which is, like, there is something in ADHD, and this is me really speculating right now. I don't even know about this. But in ADHD, you will hear a lot of people say that brown noise kind of calms your brain down. Or like, so it's like because your brain is very, very noisy. And so it's like brown noise kind of calms it down, which is kind of, I would assume, so very similar to shower noise, but also experiential sensory. I keep using that word, but like sensory wise, experientially, I'm going to say that word today properly.
dude, don't worry. I can't say the word documentary. I kept saying documentary, and oh my Lord, I just couldn't say it for some reason. There are a couple of words I actually can't fully say unless I break the words into syllables and then say them. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, but like, I think that's exactly what the concept is. So that is why a lot of creative people go in the shower, and the brain kind of organizes in a way, which is because of those sensory inputs. And now,
I mean,
that's interesting. That definitely factors into also probably why I get so many ideas in the sauna as well. Like in the sauna, when I do my cold plunges and stuff, like there are times again where I'm literally doing them and I'm like, cannot wait to just jump out of this and go to my phone or go to like a notepad and just write some stuff down.
Look, as I said, like, this is something we can really go deep down on, but I genuinely appreciate you for your time, and like, this has been...
You first.
What?
Oh no.
So, of course, and also like if we do this podcast again, I actually think it'd be cool to do it after I get my answers. Like let's give me a couple months, let me look into this more, and if I actually go down this path of trying to understand,
like you said, how I'm wired,
I think that'd be a pretty fascinating conversation on like, hey, like I got this suggestion from you, I went down this path. How did I go down the path? How did I connect the dots together, and talk a little bit more about that?
I'll just research on this for me. Associative thinking. So the way generally like that, and I was going to ask you about this on the podcast, but this is actually, I believe, the term for it. So in the book you mentioned convergent thinking and divergent thinking.
Yes.
Convergent thinking this is something I've been frustrated with, because school taught us linear thinking, which is convergent thinking, straight line, this, that. Now the thing with intelligent people is, not talented, but just intelligent, raw, let's say accountants, but really intelligent, is they can solve those linear problems more efficiently, or they have a bigger working memory, so they can work very well with numbers, but they're not creative. Now the thing with creative people is like they think not in a linear fashion. So it's like exactly why you're like, hey, I mentioned this, but then that connects to that, and most people cannot even understand it, and that's what is called associative thinking. And that is why comedians are great at this, because they'll talk about like, your hand looks like a rat's dick. I'm like, wait, what? Like,
yeah. They can just make these associations. While even rappers, I think rappers probably are so creative that they can just come up with example stories, real life events, and then mix that into words very, very quickly.
And the brain is so fast, so it just matches their mouth speed. Same with the comedian, because they have timing. And that is why Eminem is the god, because he's on both the spectrums. He's an autistic, but also so, man, it's going to be an interesting journey for you. I promise you that. You don't have to make conclusions.
I genuinely appreciate you bringing this up.